Because you said
Yeah.
that you said that unity is evidence of God, and I'm trying to figure out what the actual evidence is.
Yeah. So when we have unity, right? When we have these objects that are unified in such a way where it creates a new entity or object, given mereology, it will propose this unifier, right? Because if these things are described independent of each other, to say then they're described dependently because it's this um form in which now they're a new being, like ice cream, for example, right? Ice, milk, whatever, right? These are things are different beings and complete, and they're independently described of it. Like you can't say
Yep.
ice cream is just milk. You have to say it's milk, ice, and sugar, and whatever else you put into it, right? So I'm saying for that process to happen, there has to be a unifier, something that makes these dependently described on each other. And that thing we would say is God.
Why would why would anybody say that? We literally invent the conventions for what things for what the identity of things are separate from their parts. A car is not, we don't call cars chassis, engine, tire, fuel, radio, seat. We don't call cars what their parts are. We call them cars. So they're not, so like its identity is not necessarily, reducible to what its parts are. I think I'm kind of describing what mereology is, but that's literally just us putting labels on things. Why would there need to be a grand unifier for this just activity that we engage in?
Okay, yeah. So let's say the car analogy, right? When you say a car, you mean a car, but that's not descriptive. That doesn't tell me anything. That just says X is X, right? You go to say, well, the car is defined by its properties, right? So, like you said, the engine, the motor, steering wheel, seats, or whatever, right? Because you can't tell me, oh, I have a car without saying you have the properties of the car. That's incoherent. Meaning, these properties individually hold the same weight. When you say a motor, you can't just say, oh, I have a motor. You have to say what's comprised of it, or you entail what's comprised of it, right? You don't just say the individual being itself. That's what I'm saying. All these things are formed in such a way now they're a car, and that poses that okay, there's something that made these things that was independently described, right, of a car. Now they are formed as a car, and I'm saying that I think is a unifier. And when we reduce it to things that just humans can't do or can't be explained by physics, then we have to go for a reason of a being beyond that, right? And then we're getting into a God, right? A unifier for God, unifier as God.
What is it that the unifier does in this case?
He takes these objects slash parts and or shapes them in such a way it creates this new entity. For example, ice cream, sugar, ice, and
Okay,
milk.
okay. God definitely doesn't create ice cream, but what is it that this God does,
What
creates?
is what? Yeah, I'm just saying he just creates everything. Or I'm not saying he creates everything in that sense. I'm saying he unifies everything. So when we see a complete object that's comprised of multiple things, we know that oh, off of all these individual objects, the way it's formed into this new thing that we're identifying, that's God, right? Not that God's creating the individual parts, he's composing them in such a way now it's a new part. For example, a pillow.
I I mean, I'm it's just that I'm pretty sure some some kid in Vietnam made the pillow, not God. So I don't understand where God enters into the equation here.
Yeah, like okay, the kid could have made the parts, but how the pillow is described as a pillow, independent or well, a pillow doesn't really have a identity. It's or not identity doesn't really have its self-sufficient properties. It has other existences that comprises of it. And when we say that, we don't say God created these existences. We say God formed them in such a way. Now it's described as a pillow. Now, sure, the kid in China or whatever you said could have made these parts, but the only reason they're unified as a pillow is because of God.
I just think that that's just so obviously false because we've invented every convention for like this is like social constructivism or whatever. Why like what's the difference between like let's say you build an airplane, but you build the thrusters incorrectly and it doesn't actually have enough engine thrust to take off. So now we have to sit here and have this really annoying conversation of, well, technically that's actually a car, right? But like, well, cars don't have wings and turbine engines or whatever. Yeah, but this thing can't fly, so it's not a plane, it's a car. Like, we're just talking about, it now just becomes this debate we have over the way things are described or defined in this sort of sense. And there's just like God doesn't come into the equation ever for this. What I thought maybe you were going to say is God is a unifying mind, because that's how we come up with these things, like the way we do mereology or any kind of philosophy is by engaging with the mind. So there must be like a grand unifying mind that allows us to do that. I think that's also a bad argument. I thought that's where you're going, but you just kind of are saying that God does things and creates definitions for things that we just know that you and I and everybody else do. So I don't really get it.
I mean, you could say that's additional. God mind also could be has this unifying mind that makes it in such a way where when he comprises these things, now we have awareness of it or whatever. Like, you could say that's additional, right? Because that then actually gives me another reason to say, well, God has a mind now. He's somewhat sentient, right? But when we say we make this plane, right? And then we say, okay, well, I think the plane doesn't work. Well, we have to go under, well, is that thing still a self? Is that still a part of what a plane is? Because if it is, then yes, it still identifies as a plane. It still is a plane. It's just a plane that doesn't work. You wouldn't say a toy that wings don't interact or whatever isn't a toy. You still say a toy. You just say it doesn't work. It just doesn't fulfill its purpose as flying. That's all that is. Now, you say that's a false item, right? Because it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. That doesn't change anything about the being. Now, the reason why we understand X to be X or a car to be a car, yeah, that's the unity of God unifying our minds in such a way where we understand that. But it's also off of him comprising and unifying the being itself in these parts. The awareness is God as well.
I don't get it.
I mean, it's more of just a saying, or it's just more saying, well, every single item that's comprised of parts, the reason we identify it as that item first is because of God, and the reason it's constructed is because of God.
Yeah, but I keep asking you where God comes into this process, where without God we couldn't do it. And all you've been able to do so far is say that God's the one making ice cream, when we just know that that's not the case. I still have no idea where the necessity of God for being able to describe that things are not the same as being reducible to the parts they're made of, or if I pluck one of my hairs out, am I still a human? Yeah. What if I chop off both my arms and legs? Am I still a human? Yep. What if I take out my brain? Well, I don't think so at this point, you know. I just haven't heard anything about where God comes from for any of this.